Hello there, welcome back to the Cybersecurity Sessions, our regular podcast talking about all things cybersecurity with myself, Andy Still, CTO and co-founder of Netacea, the world's first fully agentless bot management product. Now, when we started this podcast, we wanted to try and talk about the full range of cybersecurity challenges, from what people are actually facing in their everyday lives to do some more kind of geek outs about some of the emerging security challenges. And this episode is very much on the latter end of that spectrum. And when brainstorming for topics, this topic came up and I was immediately fascinated by it. The topic we're going to try and cover off today is how we can effectively secure drones for their own protection and for the protection of others, which is something that's very new to me. It's very cutting edge part of cybersecurity. So I'm very lucky to be joined today by a man who does know about this, Frank Morris, Head of Security Architecture at Capita. Frank, thanks very much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Before we start, could you quickly introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, sure thing. My name's Frank Morris. As you mentioned, I'm Head of Security Architecture at Capita. I've been there for 2 years. Prior to that, I was a consultant, cyber consultant for one of the big, well-known Big Four.
Thanks, Frank. So, and how did you get into the interest in the subject of drones then? It doesn't sound like it's something that's part of your day-to-day job. Yeah.
No, definitely not. So what happened was I saw sort of drones as a sort of interesting subject, and I saw some of these aerial videos, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. I want to try that, and it ended up with me trying to stick a camera to a model helicopter and failed dismally, and then I saw the DJI drones and I thought, oh, I'll buy myself one of those. And yeah, initially it was just interested in the photography side, the videography side as well. And then I got interested in what's known as first person view, FPV. And this is where you strap a camera to the quad and you basically fly it yourself fully on manually. And I also had a go at creating my own sort of hexacopter as well, because my other interest is Raspberry Pis. So I built a hexacopter with a Raspberry Pi as the flight controller, and suddenly realized that the data links and everything else, this is a flying computer basically. And obviously with my background in cybersecurity, I went, how does one start looking at securing this? And obviously that was a few years back. Now we've got to the point where drones are more commonplace, and you start thinking, these could be used for malicious purposes as well. So that got me thinking, and it's something I've been interested in. And I've become a CAA certified commercial pilot for drones as well. So I do that. I've done a small amount of work on the side. Just don't tell my employer that. No, they're good with it. And so it's there. Because I do the security for the day job, I'm always sort of looking at how would you use this to protect these drones? What can you do with them? So yeah, that's essentially how it all started.
Excellent. And so I guess there's a wide range of drones, aren't there, from kind of personal individual drones right up to military drones. And how does what would you say was the current state of security was across the range of drone products that there are?
Very poor, I would say. It's a fairly new up and coming market. I equate them to IoT devices, Internet of Things. They're still in their infancy. We've got a love-hate as well between the public and drones, and whether they're useful or not. We've got a lot of FUD around some of the videos out there about what drones can do. Just go and have a look at YouTube for some of the science fiction or maybe fiction that these things can do. The CAA are currently catching up as well. The CAA, I think it was back end of, about 12 months ago, they started introducing information security into their documents. There's a document called CAP 722, which is what all unmanned aircraft systems have to abide by. and that now mentions the security. And it's interesting as well that the CAA, they're also releasing now a cyber assessment framework. So you can actually assess your drones against this to see how safe they are. But it takes a very risk-based approach, which is what CAA have tend to do anyway for normal flights. But I still think it needs to mature in terms of the detail perhaps, and understanding how we secure everything from, the built drone, the hobbyist, through to the commercial side. Although the commercial side, they probably, they do have more security surrounding their drones.
So if you start thinking of it just from initially from the hobbyist side, is this something that if you're buying a drone, you need to be thinking beyond the levels of security that are put in place by the manufacturer? As in, is this a serious concern that your drone could be taken over by a malicious actor if they put their mind to it?
We've already seen that with some of the DJI products, in fact, that they can be hacked. I think as a consumer, hobbyist drone pilot, then I don't think you need to be as concerned. The CAA have a load of requirements about how far you can fly from people or uninvolved objects, etc. They reduce the risk of these devices potentially being taken over. And one of the things at the moment is the battery life. That's a limiting factor, especially for the smaller quads. Battery life's getting better. You're now looking at well over 30 minutes for some of these DJI products. For the FB1s, though, in comparison, they tend to be 3-4 minutes tops. So there's, you can't really fly far with those.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of restrictions in place as well. So, if they lose the signal, the DJI products will return to home, which is typical of these sort of consumer drones. And you also get limited in how high and how far away you can fly them. So they've got these ideas around security. And one of the things the CAA are doing at the moment is, or have done, is they have restricted the weight and stuff as well. So the harm they can do as well is, less due to kinetic energy.
Okay, so basically from a CAA point of view, what they're doing to mitigate the risk of the security of these drones is actually minimize the damage that can be done if control were to be lost.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, thinking about a few years ago, the entire of Gatwick being closed down because there was a drone allegedly flying in the area. It would only take someone to be taking over a few drones to be imposing chaos.
Exactly.
In those, as other action been taken by the CAA to kind of prevent that from happening again?
Yeah, so we're now looking at things like all future drones will have beacons on, so the other aircraft can see them, you can see where they are, etc. And that's one area doing. There's companies out there that are looking at anti-drone techniques, which, if the drone comes within a certain distance of the airport or controlled airspace, it will stop it entering. But for me, it's the more dangerous ones. I mean, is where you get we're now getting to a point where we're looking at using drones more commercially. We're looking at using them for, well, I don't know if you've seen there's a recent article regarding the Orkney Islands where they're using it for delivering mail. And we've also seen use cases where they're used for light displays at night, where you've got hundreds of drones. Now, for me, that's starting to represent more of a threat, because it's not just one drone, it's many drones. And if you can take control of a swarm of drones, that's a lot more of an impact against infrastructure, people, etc.
Well, I mean, it strikes you as a very effective potential weapon. If
Oh
you
yes.
potentially hundreds of drones under your control.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about the commercial drones, how is the level of security on those compared to, obviously, you would expect it to be better than that in the hobbyists, but in your experience, how is it?
Not much better. A lot of them aren't as robust, shall we say, as the commercial products out there. They're still made from hobbyist parts, and this is why I think the CAA have taken this step of sort of producing a cybersecurity oversight document, they're a framework, and sort of forcing companies to go down this route of looking at how they are protecting themselves against a cybersecurity attack.
Okay, and from the point of view of companies, and we've heard a lot of, pardon the pun, pilot schemes about using drones as delivery mechanisms. So the likes of Amazon and other companies, you mentioned the one about the Royal Mail using them.
Yeah.
And in your experience or your knowledge, are the companies using this taking the security of the drone itself seriously enough to keep those services safe for themselves and for others?
I'll equate that to what we typically see in cybersecurity. Some companies are better than others. As I said earlier, for me, this is still an immature area of growth, and we haven't seen yet in the press about drones being taken over and sort of used maliciously or hijacked, etc. But again, my view is that will probably happen, and we'll get an extra focus, same way we did with WannaCry, and that brought sort of cyber to the attention of everybody else. But obviously, danger is that with drones and being able to take them over, you've got something in the air that can potentially do a lot more damage.
Yeah, I mean, what I thought it was interesting when I was thinking about this, the challenge of this for e-commerce type companies. Yep. I mean, if there's any kind of fraudulent buying going on, the high risk point for anyone doing that is there has to be at some point a handover of goods. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, when you're asking for a delivery, you know where that's going to go. So there's a point at which you can follow the person to. As soon as you've got a drone involved in that, you can essentially order your product to be delivered anywhere. You then hijack the drone and deliver that to a point at which is untraceable. Mm-hmm. So it's a whole, new way of getting hold of the last point of the high risk, large scale fraud that's going on. Yep. So it feels like it's a whole new avenue for fraudsters. And I was just wondering how much that is a consideration for these companies who are running these pilot schemes of drone deliveries.
So I'm currently working with a company called Skyfarer in Coventry. They are very concerned about this, and I've got a meeting next week with them to discuss that very subject. Not so much about the fraud, but how they do the overall security approach to stop these kind of attacks so that the likes of fraud can happen, because what they are looking at doing is delivering medicines. They're looking at initially at the UK, but Africa is one of the other countries they're doing. And obviously, if you look at countries like wider Africa, then medicines are a item that are probably of high value to other people, worth trying to hijack, basically. So, this is one of the things they're going to need to consider. So yes, that's a conversation next week. But again, what I'll be talking about is, this similarity between sort of drones and IoT devices. I mean, for me, as I say, I treat drones as basically a computer in the sky. It's got its own sort of operating system, its bootloader. It still requires software updates, and it has links back to a computer. There's a protocol called Mavlink, which connects the drone, typically with a computer backup base, and provides telemetry. But you can also control the drone from the computer. And again, you think, okay, if I can take over that computer as well, or take over that link, that communications link, then you've got control of the drone completely.
Yeah, and is that a connection that can be initiated from the computer, or does it have to be initiated from the drone back to the computer?
It's initiated by, there's the telemetry devices that you put on, initiate the connection between them. It is encrypted, but my understanding is not that well. So again, this is something that needs to be looked at in terms of, is it going to be suitable long term? And, is it something that you need to, consider? Likewise, you can have Wi-Fi on the drones as well. One of the areas I considered, doing a bit of testing in when I built that hexacopter was putting a Wi-Fi hotspot, a Wi-Fi pineapple, which emulates other networks. And the thought was, well, could we use that, put that near a building, top floor with the execs, and capture all that information? So, as I say, that's just from using it from a sort of pen testing point of view.
Yeah.
But again, I mentioned the drone swarms earlier, you've also got to look at machine to machine connections as well, because with the swarms, they have a certain amount of AI in them to know where they should be in relation to the others. So again, that needs to be secured as well. So it's very much like the approach we take for IoT and general cybersecurity. You look at the different layers, at different attack vectors, of what can be done.
Yeah, so I mean, the swarm aspect is a really interesting one. You could potentially take over a swarm there with one rogue machine. Do you feel, is that something that's theoretically possible?
Theoretically, I've not looked into drones enough to comment on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, so I think if you were to give any pieces of advice to, particularly, I guess, companies looking to get into this area, thinking of trying drones for part of their business, and maybe slightly worried after this conversation, what piece of advice would you give them?
So look at the CAA documents for a start. You have, let me just get this, CAP 1753, CAP 1850, and CAP 1849, which are particularly good as a starting point. But in terms of the hardware and thinking about what you need to look at, OWASP do a Internet of Things security verification standard. And a lot of the stuff in there can be applied to your drone ecosystem, you might want to call it. And if you look at all the areas within that, that would give you a good idea of how to perform risk assessments, how to look at your entire, sort of drone infrastructure from a security perspective, and look at how to mitigate the risk of it being compromised. IoT Security Foundation's another one. They do a very good sort of framework for, IoT in terms of how to secure it and what to consider. That's where I'd start. Okay.
And before we wind up, is there anything that you think the authorities should be doing at this point to improve the general safety for drone operators and people in general in this area?
I think continue doing what they're doing. As I say, for me, the CAA are doing really well. They're getting involved with the NCSC. They are working with the various, sort of companies out there to further, the maturity. And, I like the CAA because they typically work in partnership with people, and they are pushing this. And as I said, it's still immature, but it's heading in the right direction. So, for me, it's any companies will need to be involved, or people involved should read those documents, or just find out what's going on, or get in touch with me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Frank, and thanks for sharing that. Hopefully everyone has found that as fascinating and slightly worrying as I have today. So thank you very much, Frank, for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hopefully everyone has enjoyed that. If you have, please subscribe, leave a review, tune into our other editions of this show, or follow us at CyberSecPod on Twitter. Thank you very much, and we will see you back on the next edition of the Cybersecurity Sessions.